us at WonderCon recently. Just to introduce ourselves here, I'm Julia Leewald. I got to be a writer on the old X-Men the Animated series. I'm going to quit saying old at this point, even though it's been 25 years. And to my right is Eric Leewald, who was on the writing side of things, developed it for television. His name's on every episode, and showrunner in terms of the writing of it for the whole series run. And to my left is Zara Houston, was artist, producer, director, and if you got any quibbles with the way it looked, talk to him, or the way it acted, behaved, talk to him, and I'll just sit here and smile. So, and we are here celebrating the 25th anniversary of X-Men the Animated Series, which is astonishing.
So we thought, we usually started off, somehow this always gets people in. Send me numbers, I made it up.
That off there.
Just as a backdrop.
There we go. Woohoo!
There we said that, blow it up.
Because that's the way we roll here. Looking back, just on that right there, the reality was 1992, February, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the idea got floated internally to go forward with the making of the show. And Eric got tapped to go in the night before, to go into a meeting the next day, where he was told that night, we're talking about the X-Men. And Eric had very little idea who they were. And in 1992, there is no internet. There are no 24-hour resources. I don't even think graphic novels or trades were
Nothing like that existed.
It wasn't until the show, it wasn't until into the development of the show that the folks at Marvel, who were based in New York, would hand copy, Xerox, photocopy, send black and white pages, snail mail to California.
Yeah.
And that was the only source we had for that material.
For support, yeah, because people like Larry knew the books backwards and forwards, which was really helpful to me. Because my head writer and I were in charge of setting up the first 13 and the next 13 episodes as far as the stories went, and we really were having to learn people really fast. And as I said, it's hard to imagine. Maybe I'll let you go one on the PowerPoint there. There were no more, it's hard to think back, there were no Marvel movies. Marvel TV shows were really mostly hit and miss, mostly missed opportunities because people in Hollywood just didn't get comic books. And however weird that is, we're talking about it back in '92 when we got hired, the lady that got X-Men and Batman and Spider-Man and Silver Surfer on the air, Margaret Lesh, had been trying for 7 or 8 years to get them on the air, and nobody in Hollywood would put them on. And which is because they just said, oh, there's not enough of a audience out there, just some geeks in their basements. There's not enough audience to support a comic book superhero adaptation on TV or in the movies. So that was the attitude that we all started working in, and we all thought, as Larry will tell you, we all thought we're going to get one 13-episode season out of it, and then we're going on to other jobs. In fact, that was what our contract was, and most of us, after the first season was completed, we went out to work for other people while we waited to see if the show was a success or not, which is, again, strange to remember. This is the lady that made it all happen.
That's a superhero.
Yeah.
She's the superhero. She's the one who counted.
Fox Kids, man. I
Yeah.
love that.
She believed in it when she was hired at Fox Kids. She said, these are the first shows I want to do. Even her bosses didn't believe in it. And the guy that beside her was her enforcer, was her hands on the ground, looked at everything that Larry drew and everything I and Mike and Julie and the writers wrote, every comma, every period, and so he was our immediate boss, and she was the president, and made it all happen. So without those two people, none of these shows would have worked. Someone would have tried something different, and we just don't think it would have worked.
When I worked with Margaret, she was in charge at Marvel Productions way back in the 80s with Stan Lee, and she's the one who got together the financing to do the first X-Men, which was Pride of the X-Men, because she was trying to sell it to the networks, and we got a Japanese company to do it. They did really good work, and nothing, nothing happened. But she believed in it way back in the 80s, before the 90s version, the one we did together, came out. So she's been behind these characters for a long time.
Right, and she picked for the four people that she believed in for the core creative folks. Okay, we're all there. Larry and Will, who they worked with before on a bunch of Marvel stuff. Will Minia, who was head designer, head supervising producer for the first year. Larry was in the trenches with the art, and Will was fighting all the creative battles to keep the show in the right direction, which took a lot of time from all of us, but mostly from Will and some from me. And then on the other side, on the writing side, it was me, and then Mark Edens, who's a friend of mine from college, probably worked on 30 of the episodes. He laid out the first 2 seasons with me, and he and his brother did the entire Phoenix saga, and he laid out the big 4-parter at the end, Beyond Good and Evil. He was my go-to guy, and unfortunately, for part of the 5 years we were working, since they weren't paying us a lot, he was taken away to do a couple other series, including Exo Squad. We'd lose people, we'd gain people. Larry had the same thing. He just used the best artists he could find, but it's piecework. It was all piecework, episode by episode. And if your best guy was available, great. If he wasn't, you'd do with your third best guy or girl, and fix it. So but as you guys may remember, this is real quick here. The show came out, and there was a lot of doubt from people that 8 months while we were waiting for the show to come out. And there was animation problems, so it came out late. Finally premiered in January, and after all the resistance we'd gotten from Hollywood and even a few people at Marvel to do the show the way we wanted to do it, it came out and it just blew everybody away, and was the #1 show first in the country and then around the globe, and lasted that for like 3 years running. This article from the LA Times is one of the references to the fact that Fox was a little half network. It's hard to remember now. They just were starting out. They only had shows on for about half the day, and then they just go dark at 10 p.m. And the only thing they had going that anyone in the country knew about were The Simpsons and Married with Children. They didn't have anything on the kids show side, and anything on the other 7 nights of the week, other 6 nights of the week. And then we came along, and suddenly within a month, Fox Kids was kicking ABC, NBC, CBS's butts, and was getting half the national viewership, which is another weird thing to think about looking
Give me a
back.
reason to get up on Saturday mornings.
There you go. It was the fact that you could have a show and 55% of the TVs in America that were on that morning were watching the show. I mean, there's so many dozens of networks now. It'll never happen again. But that was the atmosphere we were in.
That's so true.
So okay, real quick on this one. When people ask, what it was about the show that was different, and because again, a lot of resistance from television stations and advertisers saying this is way too serious, it's way too adult. But that's what we inherited when Len Wein and Chris Claremont and John Byrne and those guys and Dave Cockrum reinvented the X-Men in 1975 after it had been dead for 5 years. They made it serious and adult and international, where it had been a bunch of American kids. Now all the characters were from all over the globe, and they seemed to be about 30 years old and had really adult issues. And that made it a great thing for us to write. And that was a thing we were again defending before the show came out, because people thought, you know, kids aren't going to watch this, it's too serious. But we just lost Glenn this past fall.
Yeah.
We missed him a great deal. It would have 5 shows for us. The other thing was we respected the source material, whereas I think a lot of people making adaptations for TV, the first thing they think of, oh, what can we do with this? You know, who cares about the comic book fans? But we respected the source material, and I'd say that the movie people have respected our material when they made their adaptations of what we did. So that's an interesting progression there. When we were adapting Days of Future Past, we weren't sure if we were going to be, how close we were going to be to the original story. So on Larry's storyboard, it says future tense. That was the name of the show that we were doing while it was in production.
Oh, 1 second, and Larry, wasn't the point that we weren't going to be allowed to use Kitty Pryde at this point because Jubilee had been chosen as the teenage way into the show. So on Days of Future Past, the decision was to come up with a different mutant to physically go back as opposed to
Using Kitty Pryde,
transmentally
right?
go back.
And that's where Bishop came in.
Mhm.
Right, and that's where we wanted somebody from the future physically to come back that knows all about the X-Men, but is not part of them, and could suspect them all, and that's where we decided to use Bishop. One of the other things is these characters all seem to be, to my eye, around 30 years old, with the exception of Professor X and Jubilee.
And Logan.
Logan's 97, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
these were adults, and they had adult feelings and adult stories, and we just didn't think we could have them run around pretending that they were 13 and didn't. So we gave them a lot of, very, adult dramatic problems and personal stories that I think are missing from other cartoons from the time. And then Larry, to his great credit, he'll tell us about this, we weren't allowed to use, now Marvel overlaps everybody and everything, but we were told you can only use this 18 characters or whatever.
Yeah.
Do not try to use any of the others. We don't have the rights to them. You don't have the rights to them.
Yeah.
So instead, Larry and his artists snuck them in.
Yeah, the story behind that is that in one of the episodes I've always been a person that when I was starting at Marvel Productions, I would add, there was a syndicated Spider-Man that was done in the 80s, and so characters might go to, it was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, was one episode where they go to a party at high school, at a college, and all the kids are dressed in so I would go through and dress the kids as characters from the comic books. So I've always had, thrown little pieces here and there. In the X-Men, I wanted to throw in a cameo of Spider-Man, so I requested to put Spider-Man into the show, and they came back and said no. I went, but Spider-Man's on the same network, so is Batman, so is Power. It was like, why? And I never got a decent answer why. So I was like, okay. Then what came up next was I think it was a Genosha episode, Mutant Slave Island or something like that. And the writers when I got the script, it was called, they had all these, it was populated with all these mutant slaves, and they were called Mutant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They had the characters. So I got my comic book, brought it into work, put it on a Xerox machine, and I said, okay, make this one Blob, make this one North Star, make this one Sunfire, make this one Mystique. I just started populating the characters with Marvel characters, but I kept the original names. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And sent it into the system, and not a peep. Okay, I know the system now. So it's like, all right, so I think Dr. Strange is called Magical Mutant or something like that. Thor was the Norseman, and that was an alien, Watcher was Alien
Observer.
Mutant Observer. I would just, I wouldn't call them what they were called.
But there is Spider-Man, but he's in color now because he made it past the storyboards. Because
Yeah, I finally got Spider-Man into the episode, but I couldn't use his entire body. So I drew the scene where you see a part of a chimney, and you see this Spider-Man shadow land, and then you see comes out in the foreground. And you see a web comes out, and in the next scene, the web catches something falling on some civilian somewhere. And so I got the chance to put him into the show finally. But I never called it was like a mutant webbed hand. I called it something. I never called it what it was. And that's how I got a lot of the cameos into the show that you would see. And part of it was based upon when I grew up with comics. Stan Lee, DC Comics controlled all the distribution. And so Marvel was just starting up, and Marvel couldn't get the real estate to put their books on. They limited them to so many titles. And so what Stan would do, you'd be reading Spider-Man, and then Thor would go through the frame. And then at the bottom you see a little cap that says, if you want to see where Thor's going, pick up Tales to Astonish number blah, blah, blah. So he was trying to cross-promote his books to get better sales. But what he accidentally created was a connected universe, which DC was not doing at the time. And so that always, as a kid, excited me a lot. And so when I got a chance to do the shows, I did the same thing. It was populated with cameos that I would only put in cameos if it didn't interfere with the original story that these guys had written. It would be like, okay, if you're a casual person, you see that guy with the hammer, it wouldn't mean anything to you. But if you knew the comics, you knew exactly who it was. It just created more excitement, the same excitement I felt when I would read the books. And so that's why I knew that would work. And that's why I put it into the shows, because I knew if I could feel that, if I could put what I felt like when I was 9 years old, put that into the show, it would help the show's success. And I think it did, because kids saw it. And then next week they want to see what else is coming. It gave an anticipation to the series.
It was just so action-packed.
Well, and also, again, back 92 through 97, kids didn't have a way to immediately go online and parse the episodes and say, did you see that? Did you see that? Is that what I thought it was? I don't think so.
Right.
It really meant you had to go to school the next Monday and
Exactly.
stand in the playground and parse it. Did you see that? I think it's someone. No, you're not. No, it's just. There was a certain level of excitement and shared community that really required you to watch the show and parse it with your pals.
Yeah.
Which I think today, the way we kind of binge things, I love binging, but it doesn't have the same impact on me as having watched something for 5 years and keeping up with it that way and picking it apart later in the playground.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it was Saturday morning, it was more event programming where all the kids would watch it. Then we would go back to school on Monday. Did you see this? Did you see that? Oh, did you? It would generate so much interest. And it also generated toy sales.
Yeah, which kept us on the air.
Which kept us on the air. I mean, the guy who owned Toy Biz, Marvel saw the sales, it didn't go up with a curve, it went up with a spike like this. Every weekend, spike sales like this. And Marvel finally, okay, let's go buy that company. So that's when then he bought Toy Biz. It was based upon the stuff. We made a millionaire out of somebody.
Yeah, many people.
Yes, but us.
So just finally, it's the last image here, and that's the last image from the last episode when Charles Xavier, who's dying, is taken away by Lilandra, and it reminded me that they were this incredibly dysfunctional family of completely different people, but they really had each other's back, and they really cared about each other in a way that I think made people want to come back and watch them have adventures together again. I mean, there's not one of those people in there that is a duplicate or similar to the other. That we made them as different as we humanly possible, but you believed that they all cared about each other and they all were wishing Charles farewell at the very end.
Yeah, as far as approaching it as a writer, kind of the agreement was that these are human beings having their issues. They happen to have superpowers. because my argument is if Wolverine had rogue's powers, he'd be
Right.
happy. He'd go
Yeah.
hide in the woods and he wouldn't bother touching anybody for the rest of his life. And if
Right.
Rogue was Wolverine,
30 minutes.
she'd be happy too, because she could physically touch people and she could whip out the claws if she had to. But so each character, regardless of how strong or super they were, in a way they were, the internal struggle was what made it made for compelling storytelling
Yeah.
from a writer's
Yeah.
standpoint.
And I think one of the fresh things that the writing team brought to the series is that even though they didn't come with all of this mythology weighing, it weighed down, they brought more of a personal approach to all the characters. The personal dramas and relationships. They approached the series fresh, with fresh eyes, and it really made it a big difference, because I had worked on other shows before where we worked all on the same page, and so this worked out really well, the team that we had to make the show what it is.
Yeah, it's hard to describe. I mean, listen, Larry, I looked at the MTV, I think he's worked on 75 different series. I've worked on 49, Julie's worked on 44 over the course of our careers, and only rarely does it come together and everybody's on the same page, and it just, there's a magic when it comes together and you're in agreement. And it takes a lot of effort to hold that and keep the vision consistent. But this was a real highlight for everybody, and I wanted to go through, since most of you probably haven't seen what the cast looks like. If you love the show, you might be curious. And I found, I came out with a book. I interviewed people like Larry, people like Will, the executives, the cast, the writers, 36 people, and told the history of how the show got on the air.
Oh, and I'm going to jump in here. It was a year ago at Comic Fest that we announced the book.
Right.
So it's nice here that we're here a year later and the book is now officially out.
The first mention was at Comic Fest, and we told everybody it was coming, but just to give you a sense of it, because the cast was all up in Canada, in Toronto, and so those people don't get, the visibility that people like, say, the Batman cast does, because nobody, people just don't know them.
Right.
But it was, just to give a sense, tell me if I'm wrong, that a lot of them really look like their parts. Cyclops is Norm Spencer, and believe it or not, all the other actors said he was the funniest guy in the room, but we never gave him anything funny to say in the show.
Yeah, he would flub his lines, have funny jokes, but we can never, okay, take two.
Never used it, he didn't be serious.
Oh, and just one, isn't he our previously on X-Men?
Right,
Yeah.
previously on X-Men.
That's Norm.
And Kathy Disher, get this, besides being Jean Grey, she was at the time married to Professor Xavier, and she was pregnant with her first child during the first season and had the baby during the first season. So there's an ex-child, a double mutant somewhere.
Somewhere in Canada.
Yeah.
And Alison Seeley Smith, who did Storm, she's from Barbados. And there's a story in here about of the 3 storms. We had 3 different storms over the first season, and ended up with her. They were all good. There were weird reasons why we had lost the first 2.
It involves money.
Yeah.
From the production side, not from
They're
your side.
cheap.
On the
Yeah.
production side.
But Allison was great, and she was in Toronto then. She's living back in Barbados now. George Buza, who's Beast, he's like 6'3½",
Yeah.
a big, burly, but really gentle guy.
Yeah.
Isn't he in the first movie too as a truck driver?
He's a
At the
truck
very
driver.
beginning,
Yeah.
he's the truck driver when Sabretooth's attacking.
Yeah, if you see this guy in recordings, he's big, burly, and he's, come in and you see him get in front of a mic and he's like talking Shakespeare.
So again, wonderful typecasting. Chris Potter was Gambit, great-looking guy that ended up down here doing soap operas for about 10 years. He's back.
He was also Son of Kung Fu, is what I remember.
Right. Yeah. He was worked on it, and I think Kathy Disher worked on it as well.
Yes.
A couple people
Yeah.
that were working on one show during the night, and then they'd stumble in at 8 in the morning for their X-Men show. So they got a hard time.
Yeah.
Alison Court played Jubilee. She was actually only 18 or 19 when the show started. So again, typecasting, lived in real life, lived around the corner from the guy that played Wolverine. So their real big brother little sister relationship had a real life component to it. Ron Rubin played Morph, and he's more maniacal in real life than he is when he was Morph. And he tells a story like, everybody else got a script and looked and saw, oh, 13 episodes, whoa, great. And he looks at his and says, it's the beginning of episode 2, Morph gets killed.
And it's a kid's show, what do you mean?
Yeah, so he was not happy as an actor, to be told. We ended up having to bring him back after that, again, not because we weren't allowed to kill somebody, which we had asked for and got permission to, but because when the first season ran after 6 or 7 episodes, kids were asked, who's your favorite X-Men character? And Morph won by a landslide.
Yeah.
Now, you see, I think that's because the grief and what we saw the other characters go through. I mean, he's in one episode,
I know. Yeah.
but he's funny, he's making them all laugh, they're all reacting to him. He's Wolverine's best friend. So I say never do a focus group with kids. That's my takeaway. So then you got the phone call saying,
Then I got the
hey.
phone call saying, I know it meant a lot to you to show how there's something at stake in the X-Men show by having someone be killed in action the first episode, but could you please bring him back?
Yeah.
So
So our intent was he was supposed to remain dead.
that was
That was the intent.
So again, Charles Xavier, could you typecast someone a little more like Cedric Smith? Mystique, she's actually a redhead in real life. Philip Aiken is Bishop, very, very serious actor there up in Toronto. Lawrence Bain is, as I understand, a really like thrash rocker in real life. So again, not far from Cable. Adrian Huff specialized in accents, and so was comfortable as Nightcrawler. And then one of the biggest surprises to me, Lenore Zahn, who's really stunning. This is a recent picture, still is. She is actually the equivalent of a state senator in Canada. She is the representative for Nova Scotia in the legislature. So do not screw around with her over a bill, or she'll throw a bus at you.
Now, the thing I mentioned too also is that Lenore Zane, a lot of actors can do like 6 or 7 different variations on their voices to, become a bystander here or a reporter over there. She has one voice. So if you call her on the phone, you're talking to Rogue. That's who she is.
And
So
she's Canadian, we got
she's
lucky.
Canadian.
But she's got that raspy voice.
Yeah.
And she tells stories. She'll be meeting, say, a 38-year-old colleague, at work, and who was 12 when the show came out, and she'll mention she was Rogue, and this, worldly senator just loses it. Goes weak in the knees and says, "Oh my God, you were Rogue," and so anyway, the last one. Cal Dodd, who was our Wolverine, and from like the first time we heard his voice.
Yeah.
Some of these took 2 or 3 weeks to cast.
He was
But
the only Wolverine.
He's the only Wolverine.
He was like Mark Hamill in the Joker.
Right.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about Cal Dodd is he's a jazz singer. He does like Sinatra tunes,
And he's great.
and he's good. He's got a CD out. So if you want to hear Wolverine sing "Fly Me to the Moon," all you gotta do is go online, check for Cal Dodd Sings, and he's got it for sale.
Now, Eric and Larry, the challenge was the talent was up in Toronto, and again that was a production financial situation because there were no residual issues for the Canadian performers. Am I right?
Yeah. When you record up in Canada, the actors get they get paid 200% of what they get paid here, but that's it. It's a buyout, straight buyout, and so there's no accounting for all the reruns and all that stuff. So for places like Saban, it's all financial. Pay it once, they're out of the picture.
Whereas if you're like again, you mentioned Mark Hamill, if the original Batman episodes have run now hundreds, if not thousands of times, every year there's an accounting, and every year he gets a little bit less. But actors in the U.S., SAG actors get residual payments every time a show plays, which is a wonderful thing for them. But But if a show is a hit, it means 30 years of accounting for a business and lots and lots and lots and lots of payments. So at the time we were doing the shows like this, Beetlejuice and other shows that we were doing that recorded up in Canada, people would do it simply so that they knew that the cast has been paid off and we don't have to mess with that anymore. And that's why we,
Yeah.
But also the story of where do you find the talent pool that can do these kinds of voices. X-Men, again, we're looking back 25 years, but this was a new approach to, a new kind of storytelling with animation. And
Yeah.
typically, it was things like, things had been more like Scooby-Doo,
Yeah.
all those kinds of shows.
Silly.
And yeah, this comes along and have you get, so the first audio tapes that we got back,
Oh, God,
yeah,
yeah.
because we were down in Los Angeles and they had to record it, all the folks they were testing on audio tapes, they had to mail them down here, and
Right.
then you guys were listening to the auditions.
Oh, yeah. The tapes came back recorded as if it was done like a typical cartoon show. And I got a call from Margaret Lesh and Calamari that this is awful. That you guys, myself, they sent myself and Sydney and some others, we all went up, they flew us up to Toronto because that was like, nobody liked the recordings, and we had to go through and we had to take the actors and have them unlearn what they had normally been able to do, because we didn't want, histrionics and stuff. We wanted people acting. We wanted to voice inflections and acting with the characters, and we had to pull them back. Take it down, find out the register that works for the character, and just stick with it so that they can, it would sound like they're talking to each other. So it doesn't sound like they're yelling over a helicopter in the background, that kind of stuff. So we had to unlearn, what's the phrase? We had to unlearn what they've learned.
yeah, so that it wasn't cartoony. We all, when talking to the writers, we all thought of these as half-hour movies, dramatic movies for adults that happen to be animated. And that's just a very different way of thinking about the characters and thinking about projecting your voice than any of the cast was used to that first time around.
And Toronto's a big theater, or a very rich theater community, and so
So when they went back and recast, they found people like Professor Xavier and Beast from the theater community,
Yeah.
who were used to having a more serious depth of character to their voices. And that's one reason why X-Men sounds, the writing's one reason, but that's a good reason, one of the main reasons why X-Men sounds different from
Yeah.
other shows that were written and are written now.
Yeah, I think you mentioned before at another session about how the actor who played the very first Klingon in Star Trek played the voice of Apocalypse.
Yes.
It's the same
Apocalypse.
John Pellicles.
Yeah, and he was excellent. I mean, you hear his voice and it's like, whoa. It's like, this is impressive. This is a guy you don't F with.
So anyway, guys, we got about 15 minutes left. I assume that there may be some questions in the audience. Front.
Are there any characters that you guys wanted to use that you guys didn't get to use?
Spider-Man.
Huh?
Spider-Man?
No, like, I mean, like,